Okay, for those who are just joining, I'm Chris Nelson. I'm the chair of the Model Design Committee, and this is the first meeting of the Model Design Group, and we're just convening here, and if you haven't done so already, try to get on the web meeting. I have to confess I'm on my third browser right now and haven't been able to do it, so I may not be able to get on, but it sounds like others have succeeded in getting on. I suspect for me it may be some kind of a security firewall issue. Okay, why don't we go around and just do I know people have been announcing themselves as they come on, but I wonder if we could just kind of quickly, Brian, you weren't happening to take attendance, were you? Anyone in Kentucky? Oops. Anyone in Kentucky happen to have done that?
I mean, I'm taking attendance as we go, as people log on.
Okay, can you read off who you have real quickly?
All right, starting from the top, Chris Nelson, Aaron Sutton, Jackie Scott, Jacqueline Marill, Julie Ivy, Lori Grubenstein, Mike Childress, Robert Burhans, and Tim Selnow. Is there anybody that I left off?
Jen Horney.
Right, okay. For some reason, I'm not seeing your name.
I'm still having trouble getting in, but I think I got it now.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Kathy. I'm listening in, but I haven't logged on yet.
Right, Kathy. Got you too. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right, well, why don't we go ahead and launch? We have about 55 minutes, and as I said before, this is the kickoff meeting for the Model Design Work Group, or actually we had a joint meeting with the Methodology Working Group last month, and so this is the kickoff of our monthly meetings as a separate group. And Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we will, for the time being, meet separately, but I would expect that if there are occasions when we feel like it'd be helpful to meet contemporaneously with the methodology group, is that something we could arrange?
Yes, it is. And as a matter of fact, Chris, the invite to the model design meeting went to the analytic methodology work group members and vice versa. You guys were invited to that meeting we had a few weeks ago.
Okay, great. So why don't we advance to the second slide now? I want to go over the objectives and the agenda for today's meeting. So, you know, the basic purpose of the model design group is to keep an eye on whether the index is measuring the right stuff. And so, the methodology group is as I understand it, more the how. How do we take data and aggregate it in a valid and comprehensible way? Our job is to make sure that we're measuring the right stuff. And in fact, over the history of the index, that there have been a lot of discussions about expanding it in one way or the other. And so I'm certainly gonna call upon people like Bob and Kathy and others who've been involved more than I have in recent years to kind of get us up to speed on the thinking behind the current conceptual framework. But our tasking is to identify other opportunities to expand into new areas, and also, as the second bullet point indicates, to think about whether we can perhaps strengthen the alignment of the index with a number of other initiatives. And so I think it was Brian who sent around a number, or maybe it was Mike who sent around a number of cheat sheets that we had put together, which are just little overviews of some other national policy directives. And so those are listed in the middle bullet point on slide 2 here. The CDC FEP capabilities, the DHS capabilities, HSPD 8, and the National Preparedness Report, the National Health Security Strategy. I suspect most people are familiar with that one, with those, as those are official national policy. The other one that's on the table for us is the one listed first there, which is Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Culture of Health Initiative. And as I think most of you by now know, Robert Wood Johnson has taken over stewardship of this project and is managing the implementation, providing the funding. And so they have asked that we look for opportunities to integrate with the Culture of Health Initiative. And so we can kind of talk through the details of that as we go through the day today. So I guess by the end of the hour, I don't think we're going to make every decision that we need to make in an hour. So I'm hoping we can make sure we're all on the same page. Understand our timeline and our mission, and then come up with some next steps. And so in terms of timeline, I'm really kind of thinking of our agenda in two parts. First of all, to the extent that we want to get any new measures or any revised measures or any revisions to the conceptual framework into the next version of the index, Mike has told me that we need to make those decisions fairly quickly by June. So, basically in the next 2 months. Is that correct, Mike?
That's correct, Chris.
Okay. But on the other hand, this is a multi-year endeavor, and so we have opportunities to continue to shape the conceptualization and the measures in the index beyond that. And so, I think we also ought to be thinking about what are the kind of the longer term changes or additions, things that we can get started on during the coming months, but may not finish in time for the next version of the index. So let me pause there and just see if there are any questions or observations about our tasking. And in doing so, I was involved in the early stages of the index, and then I had to kind of drop away because of time conflicts. So I'm somewhat familiar with what's gone before, but I'm not fully up to speed, and so I invite especially those who've been with the process the whole time to make any comments or observations about our tasking.
This is Kathy. I can share a little bit about alignment with other frameworks. There's been some early thought on some of that already by a variety of people we've been able to reach out to and think through it with. And that is with the CDC 50 facilities. James Rajat has done some preliminary work in that previously. Who's also on your model design group, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then related to the FEMA capabilities, Andrew Jahir has done some interesting mapping kind. So there's actually some beginnings of stuff that we began to go down that path before, which is a good thing to do. We want to continue it, but it just was more complex than we had time to do last year.
Okay. And who was the second person, Andrew? And then I missed the last name.
Jahir.
Okay. All right. And I gather both of these folks have done some mapping, and do you think we'd be able to look at those maps to kind of get ourselves oriented?
Absolutely. I'm sure they would share them, and/or I've got copies of some of the kind of early thoughts to it. And what we found, interestingly, was it's really helpful to do, but it's got a complexity to it that really warrants thinking through carefully.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
To share what we have, and I'm sure if you reach out to either of them, they'd be happy to talk about it with you. Andrew is actually going to be on the stakeholder engagement group, and I think James is on your group here.
I think he is. James, I don't think he's on. James, are you on today?
No, this is Bob Burhans. He sent me a note indicating he wasn't going to be able to make the call.
Okay.
So, again, this is Bob, following on what Kathy said. I mean, we really haven't sat down and mapped our framework to the RWJF Culture of Health, and I think that's probably, I looked at it quickly before the call, and when I look at the 4 areas, there certainly are areas within our index that address, all 4 areas, but I think that would be a very valuable exercise to do, because that is, we want to make sure that we're aligned with their overall goal, the culture of health. regarding the remaining national frameworks that are there, I mean, one of my frustrations when I was a preparedness director was that we had, multiple national frameworks, and it required the people on the, particularly at the state level, to try to work to integrate the multiple federal models. But I think that it would probably be instructive, particularly to spend some time with the National Health Security Strategy, particularly the implementation plan and the capabilities that are listed. The unifying thread through all of these, with the exception of the culture of health from RWJF, is that all of them take a capabilities-based approach. And most of the capabilities, and I think this is what James and some of the initial work that was done with CDC last year, was that most of them do map together. There's not 100% alignment, but there certainly are commonalities and areas where they align very strongly. So I think from looking at the existing frameworks, I think that's something we should spend some time on, particularly taking a look at the RWJ culture of health, the four interconnected action areas, and mapping them to the index to see if there's any real weaknesses in the existing index when it comes to those four action areas.
Okay, that's very helpful. So it sounds to me like one of the things we ought to be doing is to kind of look at the conceptual space that's defined by all of these national strategies, and there is a lot of overlap, but see where there are gaps in the NHSPI set of measures in that sort of conceptual space. Is that, Bob, sort of what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I'm thinking. I mean, we knew when we finished up at the end of last year, there was several areas that we considered that needed to be added to the index, and there are some that we, I think we know are important, but there aren't good measures of those, and so they're absent from the index, not because of we don't think that they're important, but there's just not a good set of measures that meet our criteria that add to the area. I mean, one of them is evacuation. I mean, that's a specific measure for the FEMA target capabilities. It's one of the ones that's specified there. It really doesn't exist. The only place that exists in our model, or even the public health FEP capabilities, is under non-pharmaceutical interventions, which some people might think is kind of a stretch for that particular definition. But I think it'd be worthwhile to take a look at our other capabilities, and along with the ones that we suggested last year that we knew needed to be added, and see what's missing.
Okay, that's very helpful. So, we're still kind of working out the logistics here. Mike, Brian, is this the kind of thing that the program office can help us with to try to get a hold of these earlier mapping exercises and sort of be a kind of a common point of contact for those?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I think since Kathy is working closely with Anna, and by the way, Anna and Glenn could not be on this call today because they're involved in putting on a large national conference today and tomorrow that includes several high-level folks, and so please excuse their absence. But Kathy has been working closely with Anna Hoover, who is taking the lead on the communications work group from the program management office perspective. And we can certainly work through Kathy to begin with, since she mentioned two of the crosswalks that she was aware of that had been done, and Bob and others who were involved in this previously. We can certainly facilitate and coordinate that.
Okay, so with that in mind, I guess I will propose our first action item of the day, which is Kathy, Bob, anybody on the call who knows about or has access to any attempt to crosswalk the existing NHSPI measures with any of these national frameworks or anything else that may seem relevant, please, you can send them to me and I can forward them on to Brian and Mike, or you can send them directly to Brian and Mike. So I guess that will be our first action item, and then, we don't have to spend a lot of time on today's call on the logistics of that.
Yeah, I'll be happy to see what I have there. The two quick things just to kind of share with it and it really comes how do you package it and visualize it, because with the SET capabilities in HPP, the concept was that the health security index is really broader than either, so it wasn't. That's part of the reason why it was never a direct one-to-one mapping to all. To intentionally make the point that it's more than just those capabilities. With the DHS ones, SEMA wanted to be very clear that, and DHS wanted to be very clear that we didn't make the mapping too simplified, because they felt like they didn't want to have it say this subdomain of the index immediately reflects the full captures the full amount of X capability and the DHS capabilities. So there are some nuances that they found really important there. But it's interesting to start looking at it.
Okay. So, Kathy, I believe you would mention, or maybe Bob as well, some of the complexities of the mapping. Is that what you're kind of getting into now, or are there other complexities that we should be aware of?
I think it's just the complexities of mapping and communicating. I think it's important to do, and the challenge will be how to do it simply enough to visualize it on the website, but still capture the variations within the definitions, if you compare the definitions of the index domains and subdomains and the definitions of, say, the DHS system.
Okay. Okay. So I'm thinking it would be helpful, and can we go to the next slide, to now pop up a level? I think it's been helpful to sort of be a little bit in the weeds here to orient ourselves. But I want to return back to the current framework, conceptual framework, the buckets, whatever you want to call them. And I'm wondering if I could call on Bob or Kathy or others who've been involved in this more than certainly I have been in the past, just to, in some cases, remind us, or maybe in other cases, inform some of us what the thinking is, where these come from. Back in the early days, I seem to remember that we were looking at the FEP capabilities. But could you sort of one of you talk us through the thinking behind these categories here, these 6 categories?
Can we do that one, Bob?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. The first thing I would say is that this slide says current index structure and methodology, and this is not actually the current index structure. This is the one that where we have measures identified to have a live index. There are other boxes that are not shown on there that when we would present the index in the past, we would show them as grayed out. In other words, they were part of the structure, but there weren't enough measures. We had not identified enough measures to turn on those subdomains, and so this is just a slightly bit misleading, and I think it's important to know that there are other areas that have been identified in the structure but are not active in the index. So it's just a nuance there that I think is important. For instance, non-pharmaceutical interventions is a box that we've identified under countermeasure management, but it doesn't show on this particular slide, and there are others under environmental and occupational health as well. So I think that's first of all, and there's more here to the index structure than you see on this slide, and I think it would be helpful for the rest of the folks to be aware of what those boxes are. That's the first comment. The second comment is the development came about through an iterative process with the work groups that were formed. Was heavy into the practice community, but also we had some folks from the federal government, and I know, Chris, you were initially involved. And what happened is over time, we knew we needed to do a capabilities-based approach. We felt that health security was broader than the FEP capabilities and the HPP capabilities, so we didn't want to stay strictly with those capabilities. We wanted to expand out. Under community planning and engagement, you see that last box down there, social capital cohesion. I think that reflects the folks' general belief that the community that responds to a disaster brings certain intrinsic infrastructure and capabilities to the table. So it's important to list those and find those as well. So these domains across the top were the ones that were identified as overall important. I think they map very nicely to the FEP capabilities and the HPP capabilities. And to be quite honest, they are not. They do not cover the waterfront of the HSPD9 or the FEMA Homeland Security target capabilities, the 31 capabilities. But you'll see as you look through the measures and through the subdomains that there certainly are areas outside of FEP and the CDC public health preparedness capabilities that stretch into those other 31 capabilities. The healthcare delivery one in our original conceptual model looked quite a bit different. It was listed as surge capacity. We brought together a very good and strongly opinionated group of healthcare professionals, and they formed a subcommittee and went to work on that subdomain. They felt that surge capacity got the capability wrong, that healthcare delivery was not something that was strictly based upon its ability to surge, but its ability to function during normal operating periods pre-event were probably the best indicators of its post-event functionality. And so that particular domain and its subdomains were significantly altered and changed as a result of the input from that group. At the same time, we had an environmental and occupational health subcommittee that met. They also did a lot of work, and I said there's two other subdomains under food and under environmental and occupational health that don't show here that were agreed to be important. Hazardous and waste management was one, and right now I'm drawing a blank on the other one, but it was viewed as important and needed to be added on. The only group that kind of took a different approach was we convened an emergency management subcommittee, and that emergency management subcommittee, I know Erin was on it, but they felt that they didn't need their own subdomain or domain. They actually felt that there were measures that reflected the emergency management system's capabilities, and those capabilities those measures were spread across the spectrum. So they actually thought that was a better way to show how they're involved in health security rather than having their own siloed, if you will, domain. So Kathy and Erin, anything to add to that quick review?
Yeah, this is Erin. That was a big thing because I facilitated that first discussion with emergency management stakeholders, and that decision was made almost within like 10 minutes of sitting down and talking through this, because again it gets back to, public health is here and emergency management is over here, and this integration in health security we thought would be a much better approach of how we should bring emergency management into the index.
Yeah, both Erin and Bob have done a really nice job of articulating the history behind all of this. And Bob mentioned that, they look similar to some of the capabilities through FEP and HPP. And I think that's only because we really began to and agreed to start with public health and health care, but then expand out further. And so, but we also want to be very clear about not mapping it one-to-one to those capabilities, because we want to make the point that health security really is much bigger than that. And we also wanted to use this, the structure as well as the index as a tool to really talk about the integration of activities and how these really do form as whole of community. And so, I think the emergency management piece is a really nice, wonderful way to articulate that. And, it's an important piece there. We actually, with the healthcare delivery revision, while it was important to that work group, and it has been a good process, they've gone through and done that, in some ways it becomes the one domain that is much more clearly sector focused. but we want to make sure that we are able to visualize the sectors across all of these domains as well. So one of the things we had discussion on last year in the communications work group was to potentially take the structure and do some method of visualizing it so that you could, for instance, see where emergency management weaves through, or see where pediatrics weaves through, or see where healthcare weaves through. So there's some ways to kind of think about how do we use the structure to both show the integration of things, but also the comprehensiveness of health security preparedness. The other input that came into this to this structure is we did do some stakeholder feedback, structured feedback on 2 different occasions, especially the first one. We got a lot of feedback, and that actually has also gone into some of the names of domains and subdomains and the development of new domains and subdomains, including environmental occupational health.
Okay, this is very helpful, and I think and this is Chris, by the way. I think one of the things that this underscores is that I think there are a couple of purposes as I see it to the framework, and one is to again kind of make sure that we're not missing important things. Sort of the validity piece, but also the communication piece, and so. I want to pose 2 kind of general questions. First of all, Bob, back to you. You mentioned that there were some grayed out boxes, but I just want to confirm my understanding that those were all at the subdomain level, and that these 6 domains are still that are the 6 domains the kind of the most current version.
Yeah, that's my memory. The only thing that's missing is there were 2 overarching domains off the top. That blue bar that you see overall. We actually conceptually had considered 2 overarching bars. One was federal support to preparedness, and the other one was pre-event community status. I think that both of those need a lot of work. Since this is basically a measure of states, you can't just sprinkle the federal support in there, but it was recognized that federal support was very important to preparedness and to health security, and that currently is absent from the index, and we didn't want to lose that concept that it was important and it needed to be included. And then the other one was, like I said, that overall pre-event community status, which was basically to build on, we have social capital cohesion, which starts to get at some of the issues, but actually taking a look at the infrastructure of the community, which could include such things as mitigation work and other things that have been done in flood areas that might also be important to the overall structure. But those were more conceptual ideas than they were actual capabilities or domains. But we recognize the importance. We just couldn't get them into the boxes and on the and populated with measures in the first 2 years.
And so Bob and Chris, this is Mike. I don't want, some people on the line might be confused about this slide not accurately representing the current state of the index. It does in fact reflect the current state of the index that includes those measures and subdomains and domains that are currently being used to calculate index scores for states. So if you go to the website, the National Health Security Preparedness Index.org website, you'll see various scores for states. Those scores come directly from this. The 6 subdomains that Bob referred to, one might refer to that structure, and I have seen a slide of that, but I just went on the website, Bob, and did not find in the PowerPoint that is up there currently that I guess you guys put up there in December when you handed this thing off. This is the slide that's up there. I have seen the slide that you're referring to with the grayed out 6 subdomain boxes. I think the way I think about that, as well as what this work group is going to be talking about as we move forward, is an aspirational index structure as opposed to the current index structure.
It's kind of the next step. What we had done was we had developed the structure, including the ones that Bob is not mentioned, has mentioned, but are not populated, and said, here's what we're working towards this year, but we were not able to find the measures for it. So we said we want to make sure that those are visible somewhere. Historically we had them on the site as future direction, the next step. It's not the ultimate index necessarily, but it's the here's what we're working on trying to populate at present. So I'll have to look back at the revised website to see if it's actually on this one. We have kept them on the previous website, but it doesn't matter either way. This was the next step of where we were heading at that time, I think. It's probably the clearer way to say that. We just couldn't find, it was a structure that people agreed upon, but they couldn't find measures for all of them. And the other thing that was interesting was the two overarching ones, the prevent community status and the federal contributions. The other complexity with that was not just identifying the measures, it was figuring out how they fit into the model, because they will probably not be the same as a domain or subdomain in terms of just the roll-ups. There would be the whole discussion about how is that incorporated mathematically into the model. Is it a multiplying factor? What is that?
Okay, so I want to take us fairly soon to a more specific discussion about some of the ideas for new measures. But before that, I want to see if others have questions of Bob and Kathy and Aaron. I've been doing a lot of talking here, so do others have questions or observations?
I will share that at the end of probably in a meeting in about August or so last year, we were talking about structure, and we were finalizing the structure for the 2014 index. And there was some dialogue kind of back at this issue of how do we integrate across the different domains and subdomains. And there was some preliminary discussion about a fairly significant shift in a model potentially in the future, but there was not time to really flesh that out before the 2014 index occurred, and so we kind of tabled that and said, when it transfers to RWJ, if folks want to look at this more broadly and a little differently, we could put that back on the table and have some discussion about it. It was a very early concept of how it might shift. But if you're interested ever in moving to that or thinking about that, exploring it, I'm happy to share what that looked like too.
I would love to see that. I guess one of the things you've started me thinking a little bit about is, that there are, you do have these sort of columns in a way, so that these are kind of the clusters of capabilities or things that the system needs to be able to do, but then there are these cross-cutting threads. And so, Kathy, am I right in understanding that this alternative framework was trying to kind of capture those cross-cutting threads more explicitly?
It was trying to integrate the cross-cutting threads more structurally into the index.
Okay.
It still had domains and subdomains, but it was reframing some of the domain titles and moving subdomains into different kinds of clusters that were intended to better reflect the integrated nature of health security, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yes, please share that. Send it to me, send it to to Brian and Mike as well.
Sure.
Okay.
It was just too late in the year to flesh that out and to make that dramatic a shift without input and stuff and
right.
Or input and engagement.
Okay, I understand. Okay, well, I want to pose a question that I don't think we should take the time to discuss right now, but I guess I would suggest that we all think about. At the end of the day, what are the aspects of these other national conceptual frameworks? Are there any aspects that we shouldn't worry about? I guess I suspect what's going to happen is as we keep going here, there are going to be many more ideas for potential measures than there certainly than there will be data or time to put into the index. I mean, it's always easy for somebody to look at a product like this and point out what's missing. So, I guess something for us to all think about is are there any aspects of those other frameworks that just aren't important, or I guess on the flip side are particularly important? So with that in mind, do you mind advancing to the next slide? I see that we have about 20 minutes left, and so I want to try to get a little closer to, and let's go to slide 5. I think we've already covered this as well. And next slide. Oh, actually, yeah, I'm sorry, that one, yeah, the slide 5. Forgive me. Okay, so these are some of the ideas that have been, I gather were surfaced earlier in the process, and I know there was a call for measures. Mike, can you remind us where this list of measures on the next few slides comes from?
Yes, Chris. Well, so for example, some of the measures or categories of measures that are listed under the second slide there are the ones that Bob was talking about. Congregate care, that's a subdomain under the community planning and engagement domain that the previous PMO and working groups felt was conceptually important. They developed some measures, but for the reasons that both Bob and Kathy described, the group did not feel comfortable in moving forward with those. And so that's also true with fatality management and outpatient care. Every one of those, actually. The federal contributions to preparedness, I believe that was the overarching bar that Bob and Kathy described. So that's where that came from. I think that in general, though, the collective feedback and the collective wisdom of those involved in the previous group, as well as reactions that they garnered from outside observers, was that the index needed to be, that the conceptual space needed to be expanded to maybe some quote-unquote non-traditional areas, and those are included in the first bullet.
Okay. Okay, so you know, I suspect many of you have had a chance to look at these slides here, but why don't we just advance to the next slide now, so we, you know, those who don't have the paper copy can see. I guess what I'm interested in is, do people have initial thoughts about which of these areas? And again, I want to think about this in two groups. Which of these areas might be ripe for tackling fairly quickly in this first year, and then which are the areas that we think ought to be priorities for you know, for the longer term, and any thoughts about how we might make this decision? I mean, you know, one thing we could do is compile a list and you know, send it around, and we can go through some sort of rating exercise. But I guess before we dive into anything like that, I'm hoping to just get some ideas about A, what are the priorities, and B, any thoughts about what's the best way to kind of make this decision.
Hi, this is Christy Music. Just wanted to let you know I'm calling in from Department of Defense.
Hi, Christy. Thank you for joining us.
And I would say, Chris, this is Mike Childers again. The next slide on slide 6 also includes a list of potential measures, and those were measures that were brought up in large part, I think, in the group in the meeting that you made reference to at the beginning of this call, where we had the joint in-person meeting of the analytic methodology and the model design work group to discuss the current context, the situation of the index and where to go forward. And so we've listed on that page some of the things that came up in that meeting because we talked about this then.
Okay, thank you.
It may be helpful, this is Kathy, it may be helpful to think through as you think about priorities. You know, there's two categories with that. One is, are measures available, and two is, have we begun to look yet? You know, or it's important to include, and the others are measures available. So I think this list that is on the slide now, on slide 5, were certainly ones people thought were important to include in priorities, but just didn't feel like they had enough measures currently. So if through the call for measures or the work that UK has done, if they're finding a new one, it certainly is worth reevaluating those, I would think. And then the other, I think it's on slide 6, there are probably other new ideas that people may have thoughts on prioritizing. That's not showing up in mine yet. I don't know what the next slide shows, but I remember, for instance, people talking about the importance of capturing infrastructure as a key part, whether it's electricity or water supplies or those kinds of things that would keep systems running and health up to speed. Or there was interest in the economic component of things, but the group here might have a broader context of what are the next ones that are really worth exploring for the first search for measures even.
I think that's a great point. And Mike, do we have any additional information on candidate measures for any of these, or is that something that might be worth doing? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I wish Glenn was on this call because he's in a better situation to discuss that than I am. But we do have some candidate measures, I think a short list. We put out a call for measures, and Glenn has been doing most of the heavy lifting on this. He's been engaged in various conversations with people, various constituent groups and their leadership about this. But we're really looking, I think, to this work group to provide us the strategic direction on what those candidate measures might be. And the reason that we need them by June is because once we get this list of measures, we have to begin researching the measures to find out if, to understand the validity of the measure and the data availability, those kinds of important, very operational items that will strengthen the index. And that will take some time, of course, and we want to get this, the updated version of the index out the door we want this to be completed by the end of 2015.
Okay, so I think as I understand, if I understand Kathy correctly, what she's suggesting is that it would be helpful in providing strategic direction if we have some sense of where there might be some earthly hope of actually measuring some of these as well. Is there a table that we could put together and perhaps look at in the coming weeks to get a sense of, I think a lot of us probably have ideas about some of these specific measures, but is there anything that you guys have put together or could put together to kind of give us a sense of the supply of data and measures so that we're not, kind of off in the stratosphere thinking about things that are impossible to measure?
Chris, this is
And hi,
Mike.
this is Christy Music. I also wanted to ask, are there a set of priorities for public health and what we're trying to accomplish? And that will help us determine what measures we want to spend the time on collecting data. So, for instance, federal contributions to preparedness may be a priority item for our public health system as well as our preparedness of our public health system. Grant monies, for instance, could be part of that. Or fatality management. Is there a national plan? I know there isn't one, but are there regional or state plans or enough capabilities to manage large numbers of fatalities in a large-scale disaster? So if we also have background on what priorities there may be at this time, we could use that, but also we could, on the contrast, we could use these measures to help set some priorities if we're missing information or data or any development in those specific measure areas.
Christy, I think that's a really good point. And earlier we had talked a little bit. We didn't get too far into the weeds about these national strategies, and as well as the RWJ Culture of Health framework. And so I had suggested that folks it sounds like the earlier team had started doing some crosswalks of the NHSPI measures against some of these frameworks, and are going to be sharing that with us. So I guess maybe the way this is going is we're kind of looking at this from two perspectives. Where that we're looking from the demand side. What are the priorities? Where do we really want and need measures? And I think that's where your comment comes in. But then we're also coming at it from the supply side, which is all right. Well, that notwithstanding, where could we hope to get some measures at least in the short run? So I guess I'm sort of envisioning that we want to kind of look at both the supply and the demand, and then kind of use that hopefully in fairly short order to identify some things that are both important to measure and where we could get some data. But what do folks think? I mean, is that the right way to think about this?
Chris, what may be helpful, this is Kathy, is I would assume that in the transfer, Mike, you must have, there are, with each of these topic areas, at least the ones, not necessarily the two overarching ones, but the congregate care down, there certainly are spreadsheets that have what the measures are people considered and threw out for that, and what the ones that they considered and kept in but didn't feel was a sufficient capturing of the subdomain yet. So we've actually, you could look at what's already there, and then see if there's anything that UK has found in the interim that's not on that list we would want to consider putting in there. Have they found something that now rounds it out better, and it's a low-hanging fruit and we can move it forward through this work group, saying does this capture it yet? Or does anyone on the work group know of any other sources for measures that we've missed? So it might help you to have that list of what's been evaluated and rejected and what's been evaluated and kept, but just needs to be fleshed out further.
Mm-hmm. I think that's
you have that. Mike,
Kathy,
do you have that list?
Kathy, this is Mike. I pulled up the Excel sheet that has all of the current subdomains, the 18 that are being used in the calculation of index scores, as well as the 6 that have been grayed out or darkened out. And I clicked on the fatality management one. I see which has been grayed out and is not on that organizational looking box that shows the current structure. And I see 3 measures that are very specific measures. Is that the sort of thing that you're talking about? I mean, we have a whole pile of information, but it looks to me that if it made it on this Excel sheet, and Bob, please weigh in here, if it made it on this Excel sheet, I take that as pretty strong evidence that the prior working groups felt that these were very good candidates for future inclusion.
Yeah, that's
absolutely right. I mean, if the measures are in the spreadsheet, we actually we collected the data on them. Those were ones that we felt that they were good measures and they should be kept in those subdomains. But when we looked at the ensemble of measures in total for that subdomain, we felt that the measures weren't enough to justify turning it on and putting it into the index.
And then the companion piece to that I don't know if you have, but it would also have to be helpful, is the list of things that we looked at and said, oh, I don't think so, for various reasons. So that you don't have to recreate the wheel, or, if you can see it's at least been considered, it doesn't mean you can't pull something new in and reconsider that, but it might be helpful to see the list of what was looked at and not included. I don't know if that's available somewhere, you all, or where that is, or that if you'd like to have that.
Well, I've got a DVD that has that we got from Lori at RWJF, who I think got it from Amanda at CDC, and it has it's a DVD, and it's got a lot of files on it, and so I can poke around on that and see what I can learn.
Yeah, why don't we do a little homework, Mike, and then we'll reach back out to Bob and Kathy if we have any questions or if we're not seeing this. But I do think it'd be very, very helpful to see what's on the cutting room floor, if you will. So we only have a few minutes here, and so I noticed, Jacqueline, you had made a comment in the chat box about fatality management. That's sort of the direction I wanted to go. I know we can't do a complete job of kind of talking through priorities here, but Jacqueline, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just kind of articulating or summarizing what's in your comment there, and then maybe if others have other particular ideas that they want to underscore for us, and that can sort of inform the homework that Mike and I and others do between now and the next meeting.
Yeah, so you may have known from the face-to-face meeting that Robin Gershon at University of San Francisco, California, San Francisco, and I are doing a study of mass fatality preparedness, and we're looking at 5 sectors: the health departments, medical examiners, offices of emergency management, faith-based, and the death care industry, we call it, which is the funeral directors and crematories and cemeteries. And they have emergency or plans for responding. They have a couple of associations, a national one and an international one, and we worked with them to create a survey. So that, I think, would be a source of getting the measures, whatever they have in their preparedness for mass fatality events. They're very overlooked, and the findings of our study are that there aren't strong ties with the other responders, particularly the government responders, with this community, although they seem to have a pretty good network with each other, so that they have a sense of sharing resources like body bags and refrigeration and all of these things that no one wants to think about, but they have to think about. So I think it's one that really needs to be included, so it would be, I don't think anyone would argue that it would be one of the priorities to include in any sense of preparedness, because these mass fatality incidents, as I'm writing the paper, I'm just seeing these estimates from the Department of Defense about what can happen with what, from a chlorine tank exploding to a terrorist event to a natural disaster. The mass fatalities are a big risk. That's my thoughts.
Okay. That's helpful. So are there, we only have a couple of minutes, but are there other, anybody want to propose another candidate priority? And again, we're going to do some homework here and do this somewhat systematically, but any others that you don't see on this list here? Or
This is Bob Burhans. It's one of the things that I wanted to do last year, and we just couldn't get it done with everything else we had to do. And it may be a very similar process this year. We may not be able to get it done this year. But as you know, for each one of the measures, we did a measure detail, which went through and answered a series of important questions about the measure and how it related back to the subdomain and then ultimately the domain. I think one of the things that I wanted to do last year, and I think John Links was also very interested in doing it, and again, we just ran out of time, is for each one of the subdomains and then ultimately each one of the domains, it'd be very good to do, I want to say, a detail, if you will, of looking at that subdomain and seeing if an ensemble of measures do a good job of measuring the capability in that subdomain, and then at least qualitatively identifying areas that would require additional measurement. Things that we, tasks, capabilities, capacities that are important to the subdomain, but just have not been captured to date. I think that would go a long way to making sure that, again, we made our best guess that the ensemble was adequate to turn it on, but we didn't say that the ensemble had to be perfect or the ensemble had to be compelling. We indicated that we felt that there was enough measures to turn it on, but I think that kind of review would be a good process to go through, and I think it would add a lot, at least to the face validity of the index.
okay. All right, so thank you, Bob. So we're just about out of time here. So Mike and Brian, I assume we'll send around some action items, some notes after the meeting.
Sure.
And I'm happy to help with that, of course. But
absolutely.
okay, all right. So we'll get that on paper, but at a general level, I guess there are a few things for us all to do. One is, if you have ideas for measures that you don't see on the slides here, or if you have additional ideas about data sources or relevant literature, please forward that along to us. Also, if I know Kathy and Bob were going to dig up some crosswalks of national strategies to the existing NHSPI measures. If anybody has additional information about national strategies, or if you see something that's missing from our list, please share that with us. And I guess what I see us doing in the coming weeks is starting to kind of get a better feel for how the current measure set relates to these national strategies and frameworks, including the RWJ culture of health, to see where the gaps are and, which gaps can we live with, which gaps can't we live with, where are there data to fill those gaps, where aren't there data. So that's sort of the demand side, and then on the supply side, I see us, going back at the materials that the last team forwarded to us and making sure we're up to speed on the measures that were considered but not adopted for various reasons. So I'm thinking that might be the best way to do this. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're sort of under the gun if we want to add any measures for the next version. So if anybody has any thoughts, any strong candidates for those, please send those along as well. And so we'll sort through this in the coming weeks, and then we're going to meet again in another month. Is that right, Mike?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So, Mike, anything else to say before we wrap this up?
Thank you to everyone for coming on the call today, and thank you, Chris, for your leadership in directing this, and thanks to Brian for getting it all set up and making it work.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.